I remember thinking, boy, it's been a long time.
Hanoi, North Vietnam, February 12, 1973. After years of frustrating negotiations, the long-awaited return of 591 American prisoners of war begins. It was called Operation Homecoming.
Ed Davis smuggled the dog out, if you can believe that. Where he got the dog, I don't know, but he smuggles this puppy out in his coat. Other guys are bringing out their prison uniforms and paraphernalia, and some others are getting out just lucky to get out with their lives.
There's just that nagging feeling that these sons of bitches, this is just a trick. They want to shoot us down. They're going to let us take off and then shoot it down. And then there was a huge cheer that went up when those wheels in the well. We heard the wheels lock up. And it climbed out, and the pilot called feet wet. I mean, we're out over the water, and you could hear the roof blew off. And the guys were running around kissing all the flight nurses, smelling their perfume.
They had cigarettes and candy and Playboy magazines, and it was still a dream. It wasn't until we landed in the Philippines. It was off the plane. And then the reality hit you. We're free.
POWs of the Vietnam War were the longest-held American prisoners of any war in U.S. history, up to almost 9 years. The incredible stories you are about to see are a celebration of the human spirit, a testament to the remarkable determination of men who refused to die, whose only thoughts were to survive and return home with honor.
We didn't consider ourselves, and to this day, we don't consider ourselves heroes. The real heroes were the ones who weren't on the plane leaving Hanoi. The real heroes were those whose names are on the wall down at the memorial, those who made the ultimate sacrifice. We're the lucky ones.
In 1964, there were already over 16,000 Americans training the South Vietnamese Army, which was being funded by the United States government. At this point, most U.S. military personnel had orders to avoid confrontations with the Viet Cong.
As you know, on August 2nd, and again on August 4th, North Vietnamese surface vessels attacked U.S. destroyers operating on routine patrol in international waters in the Gulf of Tonkin. In retaliation for this unprovoked attack on the high seas, our forces have struck the bases used by the North Vietnamese patrol craft.
Navy Lieutenant J.G. Everett Alvarez Jr. was a member of that strike force. He was a 26-year-old A-4 Skyhawk fighter pilot stationed on the USS Constellation in the Gulf of Tonkin.
I was one of the pilots that was assigned to a retaliatory raid into North Vietnam, very first raids in North Vietnam. And I was shot down over our target, which was the torpedo boat base at Han Gay, which is pretty far north, about midway between Haiphong Harbor and the China border. And became the first pilot captured in the Vietnam War. This was the very first time we had ventured that far north, and there were no preparations for search and rescue. There were no units assigned to help us in case we should go down at the time. And I really didn't know what was going to happen, because I was, next thing I knew, I was being shot at. And then I began to wonder, I wonder if if I'll survive. And I began to pray.
Uninjured, Lieutenant Alvarez was taken to Hoa Lo Prison in Hanoi. It would later become known to the American POWs as the Hanoi Hilton, a place of brutal interrogation and torture.
My name is Everett Alvarez. I was born December 23rd, 1937. My service number is 644124.
This is where many U.S. prisoners spent their first years of captivity in North Vietnam.
The hardest part about this whole thing, first 3 months, 4 months, was the fact that it didn't take long to realize, I could be there a long time. That had to sink in. The second thing that had to sink in is that I had to learn how to deal with being alone. The loneliness was probably the hardest thing.
Alvarez's loneliness would last a while. Making contact with another American would take him more than a year. As the missions over North Vietnam increased, so did the number of prisoners. By the summer of '66, there would be over 150 POWs scattered throughout 24 locations across Southeast Asia. On July 6th, 1 week after the largest U.S. bombing raid in North Vietnam, 52 POWs were bound and blindfolded, then taken into downtown Hanoi from 3 nearby prisons: the Zoo, the Hanoi Hilton, and the Briar Patch.
I thought they were just going to march us around the square because there were some floodlights up there and cameras and things like that. So as they gave the order to march, start walking, the interrogator we called the Rabbit had a bullhorn and kept getting the crowd. The crowd kept getting worked up. And as we're marching by, all of a sudden there's a street that leads off between these 2 grandstands, and I looked down and I said, holy smokes. Well, instead of marching around this square, we got to where the street opens up, and as far as you could see, there's people lined up in crowds down this street, and mobs. And after a few blocks, they start throwing things, and people would walk up to you and hit you with things, shoes, punch you, and the guards kept pushing the crowd back, just pushing them back. But they kept coming on, they kept working on. I mean, everybody wanted to get a whack at you.
Lieutenant J.G. Paul Galante, a pilot off the USS Hancock, was shot down and arrived in Hanoi only 1 week before this frightening event.
We were just getting the daylights kicked out of us, and they're parading us through the streets, and the crowd got loose, and they're coming up and slocking us and kicking us, and John had been there since September of '65, and he heard me say, I'd been there for 1 week, he says, gosh, I hope they don't do this every week. And he thought that was kind of funny. And they told the world they were marching us to interrogations, and the Vietnamese people, quote unquote, just found out about it and had to decide to hold this spontaneous demonstration. And since they told the world they were taking us to interrogations, they did. And virtually everybody in that parade got beat up that night and tortured and forced to write a statement saying they were receiving humane treatment. That, to me, was the irony of the whole thing.
Lieutenant Galante became known around the world by a photograph on the cover of Life magazine. But there was much more to this photo than meets the eye.
In June of '67, they said, now we have some Germans coming to this camp. We're going to take you to a special camp. So they took a bunch of us over to a camp called the Plantation that had been an old French film studio. And they gussied up the rooms, and it's the biggest room I ever lived in North Vietnam.
His captors weren't trying to accommodate the prisoners. They were painting a false picture for use in their propaganda with the aid of a photographer and film crew from East Germany.
As the camera was looking at me, I said, I just glared at it. And I just stared and looked and tried to make my mind look just as blank. My mind go as blank as possible and get a vacuous stare, and then slowly ease my middle fingers down between my legs. And they never questioned it. I don't know if they saw it or didn't see it, but anyway, I had my middle fingers extended, both of them, just in the chance that if any Americans ever saw the picture, they'd know that I wasn't doing this voluntarily. And sure enough, that picture is the one that appeared on Life magazine, but my fingers were airbrushed out, and for years my nephew thought that Uncle Paul's fingers had been chopped off.
Back at home, the families of the POWs had no idea what was really going on with their loved ones.
When Paul was first shot down, all I knew was what the government told me, and they said to be very quiet, that they were doing things quietly and secretly to assure good treatment for the men, and we had to go with that.